in to Palmetto Sports Daily. I'm Carmine here on the road in Charlotte at the ACC Men's Basketball Tournament, which we will talk about that tip-off for Clemson men's basketball in just a few moments. But first, let me introduce our illustrious cast of characters here. Kevin Bilodeau in Charleston. We have Teagan Brown in Myrtle Beach and Julia Westerman in Columbia, because the legend Rick Henry is celebrating his birthday. So happy birthday to
Happy
Rick Henry,
birthday, Rick
an absolute
Henry.
legend of our industry for nearly 5 decades. So congratulations to him. But it wasn't a birthday wish for the Clemson baseball team. Yikes. Tough game for them. They lost to Georgia Southern at a neutral site game, and they lost pretty badly, 6-1. And all those runs were scored in the same inning. They were scored in a 2-out scenario, too. If we can take some video looking at Clemson as I look at the recap, Georgia Southern scored 6 2-out runs in the second inning, capped by a grand slam. And here's what happened before that. 3 walks, a hit by a pitch, a wild pitch, and then a grand slam. So a series of unfortunate events for Clemson baseball, which came in, according to some sites, ranked number 8 in the country, and losing to a team in Georgia Southern that came in with a record of just 5-11 this season. But the good news for the Tigers, obviously, those midweek games are not the big focus. Plus, they're playing against a top 10, or in some cases, some sites, a top 5 Georgia Tech team just a couple days after this loss to Georgia Southern. So you have to imagine, and the facts prove that they were sitting some of their best players, definitely not pitching their best pitchers for a midweek game, and of course a top 10 matchup coming up just a couple days later. So I'm personally not very concerned. The Tigers snapped their 7-game winning streak, which the last time they lost was to South Carolina at the beginning, the first game of the Palmetto series. The Tigers are still 15-2 this year, getting set for a top 10 matchup hosting Georgia Tech in a series. So, Julia, even though it's a bad loss, and I know Clemson still should have won the game no matter who was playing for the Tigers, with those other factors, I'm really not too concerned, although I'm sure Eric Bakich is going to use this as fuel for motivation into the start of ACC play against a top 10 conference opponent.
Yeah, Carmine, I think there's less cause for concern with this Clemson team, because I feel like more than any other sport with college baseball, it's impossible to win them all. So you're going to drop a couple here and there, and sometimes they're not going to make very much sense. But I think there is a little bit more cause for concern with South Carolina's midweek loss to the Citadel last night. I think that, you go into this game with thinking you have a little bit of momentum after going 5-0 last week and trying to get things picked back up after that Clemson series loss. But you lose on the road to the Citadel, and it ended up being the trap game that you thought it was going to be. They just couldn't quite quell the Citadel offense last night, just really got things going and just could not come back on their end either. Of course, you have another game where Will Craddock performs really well, but the problem is he can't be the only one on the team performing well. So a tough loss for them, and they now have to start SEC play on the road at Florida. Florida's had some weird stuff early on this season, losses to High Point, and they're kind of, getting their things in order as they get ready for conference play. But I just don't feel like this is the place that South Carolina really wants to be in. But Kevin, how does this win affect the Citadel and their team moving forward?
Well, this is a big deal for the Citadel, and their coach said that afterwards. They've been looking for kind of this signature win over a major program ever since the new coach started last year. So this is kind of that thing, beating an SEC team, even if it's a South Carolina team, that's not quite what they have been in the past. This is still a big deal for the Citadel, and, picking up any kind of win over a major conference, especially in a home game where they hit a bunch of home runs. South Carolina actually jumped out. First batter of the game, like you mentioned, it was Will Craddock hitting one something like 430 feet over the wall in the left field for a solo homer to give the Gamecocks the early lead. Citadel bounced right back in the bottom of the first. T.J. Anderson with a 2-run homer to dead straightaway center field. That one went over 400 feet. They added another homer in the second from Ryder Propel. So that put the Bulldogs on top for good. After the game, the Cid and Paul Maneri talking about this game.
Needed this, not so much about the Gamecocks, but for the Citadel, because we've set up a tough schedule, and it's been tough, and we've been close in a lot of games. And I thought tonight that our guys played really well. We played clean baseball, and we hadn't been doing that. We limited the free bases. We didn't make mistakes on defense, and then we had really good at bat.
Give credit where credit is due. I thought the Citadel played a great game tonight. I really did. Early in the game, they turned around a couple of 95-mile-an-hour fastballs and hit them out of the ballpark. They made some terrific plays. You know, their pitchers did a good job. They coached a great game. I mean, I give credit where credit is due.
You know, that's a good win. You know, it's always good to, you know, beat somewhat of a rival in your own state. So, you know, that's a good feeling. You know, we came off a tough weekend in Kentucky. Didn't swing the bats bad up there, but, you know, we continue to play offense here tonight, and our pitchers threw good, so it worked out for us tonight.
So like I said, a big deal for that win for the Citadel over South Carolina. The other thing for the Gamecocks that I kind of noticed, Julia, Alex Philpott got the start on the mound for South Carolina, the transfer from Florida. It was made a big deal. This was his first start of the season. Didn't even last a full inning. Got a couple of outs, then gave up that 2-run homer, gave up another double a couple batters later, and he was brought right out. So I don't know if I don't think there was an injury. He went right to the dugout and put his head in his hands, so he was obviously very upset with his performance. I don't know if it was planned that he wasn't going to pitch too long, Julia, but definitely wasn't a good thing for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, I mean, pitching continues to be a big question mark for this team. I mean, I feel like that's something that they really focused on in the offseason to try to build back up. And then, of course, you have that Jake McCoy news going into the season, and then it just hasn't really panned out to what they thought it was going to be. So, of course, you don't want to be struggling with your pitchers as you go into SEC play, but it does seem like that is where they are right now. But, hey, we're not going to have all bad news from this state. Teagan, how's Coastal looking?
Yeah, number 16 Coastal Carolina with a win over number 12 Wake Forest last night. I think this is really good for Coastal for a couple of reasons. One, of course, it's their 10th win of the season, but two, I think this is a really nice just morale boost ahead of conference play because they're getting ready to play App State, a team that had lost to Wake Forest, and then they got crushed by Western Carolina last night. I think that final score was 12-3. Don't quote me on that exact one, but they lost that one big. But for Coastal Carolina in this one, you know, they were down 4-2 at the top of the 6th inning, but then a huge surge in the bottom of the 6th with 7 runs put them over the top, gave them everything they needed to get this win. Of course, Colby Thorndike, Dean Mijos, and Walker Mitchell were all big helps in making that happen. Pitching-wise, you know, Julia, you were just mentioning, it's one of those tough things that as you go into conference play, you really want to have it set in stone. You want to feel confident in it. I don't necessarily think Coastal is on that level yet. We've talked about it, you know, a little over the past few weeks, just the fact that this pitching staff has struggled because of injuries this year, and then because of that, they've had to rely on a lot of their younger talent. They've pitched 5 freshmen, and they've done a good mix of just having multiple pitchers in each game and switching pretty fast when they realize something isn't working. So head coach Kevin Schnall still kind of trying to figure out what is going to work in his rotation on the mound and then also at bat. He says he hasn't really found that go-to guy yet, but hopefully ahead of App State this weekend, they can find a little bit more of a solid lineup as they get ready for Sun Belt Conference play. We're going to take a quick break here on Palmetto Sports Daily. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Palmetto Sports Daily. Several men's conference tournaments get started this week, and if you're watching this prior to 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 11th, then the Gamecocks are going to play tonight in the SEC tournament in Nashville. They will go up against Oklahoma, and while we'll get to that matchup, the biggest pressing news from South Carolina men's basketball is the fact that Lamont Paris will be returning for a 5th season in 2026 and 2027. And I know there was a lot of, stir online whether or not Paris would be returning because he's had kind of 2 lackluster seasons in a row and really only one standout season from his second year when he took the team to the NCAA tournament and they got knocked out in the first round but went 26-8. He was the SEC Coach of the Year. So kind of a roller coaster of a tenure so far, but he will be returning to the team next year. And we have a statement from Athletics Director Jeremiah Donati talking about how Gamecock Nation deserves a winning men's basketball program. He talked about how he understands the frustration that that's not been what's been happening with this program, but he says, quote, Coach Paris can win here, and he has proven it. Our goal is to build a men's basketball program at South Carolina that is consistently competitive in the SEC and nationally. And now Paris caught up with some media in Nashville last night, and he was asked about his conversations with Donati and the decision to bring him back next year.
My conversations with Jeremiah really have been focused on, the landscape of college athletics and how rapidly it's changed, particularly in the last 2 years. If you think about how quickly some of these drastic changes are making, and then how we can continue to keep up and forge ahead within this landscape.
Now to look ahead to tonight's game, South Carolina is playing Oklahoma at 9:30 in the first round of the SEC tournament. That's in Nashville. And a big note here is Oklahoma is one of the 4 teams that South Carolina was able to beat during conference play this year. They took them down 85-76 back on January 20th, and you saw a really complete performance from the starting 5. All 5 of them were in double figures. Michi had 20, Kobe Knox 18 points, Elijah Strong 17 points. So I feel like if they're able to get their offense going, they are able to beat Oklahoma, but as they always say, it's hard to beat a team twice in 1 year. But guys, how are we feeling about, Lamont coming back and then going into the SEC tournament tonight?
Julia, I gotta say, in that statement, just the fact that the AD said, he's proven he can win here. Sure, yeah, in the past, a few years ago, but you get 4 conference wins this year. You had 2 last year. I'm just kind of curious, what have the fans' reaction to this been? Because I've seen a lot of just back and forth about so many fans not wanting him here. Of course, South Carolina is making the decision for whatever reasons, whether it be financial and all the NIL money or whatever. But just what have the fans' reaction been to that statement?
It's been pretty loud online. I mean, if you looked on South Carolina kind of social media for the past few months, you would have thought that Paris should have been fired back in November when they got this season started. So I feel like a lot of fans rather, assumed that would be the natural progression of this. But I think that the South Carolina athletics department has a lot more on their hands than just men's basketball right now. So they kind of have to weigh a lot of different things all at once. And obviously this is what they thought was the best course of action for the men's team and moving forward as they go into another year. But yeah, I mean, the entire time I've been here, Lamont Paris has been here. So we're already he's going into his 5th year with this team. So you have to kind of start weighing some of those things and see what he can do in the future. But yeah, it's very interesting to take a look at, what the process is when you don't know how everything went. Carmine?
Yeah, and I want to get Kevin's opinion on this too, because, coming back for a 5th year, but Kevin, if there's another performance like the past 2 seasons, like Teagan mentioned, 2 SEC wins, 4 SEC wins, if it's less than 5, how can you rationalize, other than the money part and the buyout being like $12 million like we've been mentioning on this show, how can you possibly rationalize bringing Lamont Paris back for a 6th season if he has another similar performance?
Well, you definitely can, but I think the buyout goes down a whole lot if he coaches next year and you get to the end of next year. I think that buyout cuts in half. But if you look at those numbers, we mentioned a $12 million buyout. You figure he's got to buy out his assistant coaches as well, and then you got to take on the money to bring in a new head coach and a new staff as well. So you're looking at probably more than $20 million you're spending just to make this coaching change, if that's what they had chosen to do. Instead, if you take half that money and put that towards the roster, and you put $10 million into bringing in better players in South Carolina, I think they kind of understand they're not going to compete for a championship at the SEC level with what they've been doing. They're not going to go up against, Florida and Kentucky and all these top 10 teams that are perennially up there. They're just not going to be able to compete with them unless they start putting the money into the players. I think, like Teagan said, we've seen that Lamont can coach these guys when he has good players. He's been able to do that in the past. So I think this is actually the right move. I think everyone's kind of going to the left side and making the quick move to fire the coach and spend the money that way. I think investing in the players, Carmine, is probably the way to go.
Yeah, it makes sense with the money, and definitely stick it out for one more year given all those factors. Over here, right behind me at the ACC tournament, we got the rival of the Gamecocks set to tip off. Also, Julia, at 9:30 tonight. Late ones for us media in the Palmetto State, but happy to do it nonetheless. Clemson is tipping off as a 5 seed against Wake Forest, the 13 seed. So on paper, you would say Clemson has the advantage, but in their last matchup just 3 weeks ago, Wake Forest scored 85 points, Clemson only 77, so you did the quick math, the Tigers lost by 8, and that 85 points is the most Clemson gave up to any ACC opponent all season. But it is about perspective. The Tigers losing 5 of their last 7 games after that great start, but in a spin zone, they have won 2 of their last 3. And heading into their ACC tournament, looking for their first ever ACC tournament championship, Brad Brownell was asked about the potential of early exits like we have seen a little bit of in the past.
Well, we made the semifinals last year, didn't we? So, I think we sometimes get overlooked on some things when you do well as we've done and advanced. You don't have to play some of the first-round games, so those are good. But we certainly want to advance. We want to do. We're still trying to win an ACC tournament at some point here, and this is certainly a challenging draw. But you just take it one game at a time and try to win the next game, and build confidence throughout the tournament. I think that's one thing that can happen is you can build momentum and confidence, and we need to try to do that with this team.
And the good thing is, too, that Wake Forest and Virginia Tech just played last night in another late one, and they played in overtime. So it could be good news for Clemson, which is coming in fully rested. This is their first game of the ACC tournament, and Wake Forest just coming off an overtime thriller against Virginia Tech, which Virginia Tech and Bedford, their star guard, had a chance to win at the buzzer in regulation, missed shot, and Mike Young, the former Wofford coach, now coaching Virginia Tech, heartbroken at the very end. But we'll keep you updated on everything Clemson. We'll have much more tomorrow, and the Gamecocks as well. But we'll be right back after a short break with much more on Palmetto Sports Daily.
Welcome back to Palmetto Sports Daily. We move over to women's basketball, and while South Carolina and Clemson completed their conference tournaments last week, here in the CAA, the College of Charleston getting ready to head up to Washington, D.C. for their conference tournament starting off on Friday. And the conference announcing their postseason awards today. And the College of Charleston, after finishing first place in the conference this season, having just 2 conference losses, cleaning up in those postseason awards, including Taryn Barbeau, who was the reigning Conference Player of the Year. She now becomes the 2-time reigning Conference Player of the Year as she takes that award once again. Head coach Robin Harmony named the Coach of the Year in the conference as well. Taylor's sister, Taryn, also named first-team All-CAA along with Taylor. And Grace Ezebilo is the Defensive Player of the Year in the conference as well. So big things for the College of Charleston. They are the overwhelming favorites to win the CAA tournament up in D.C. this weekend and move on to the NCAA tournament. And the Cougars excited to get going.
I think we got to just have a quick start for sure because we've been having slow starts. But I think if we have a good start in the beginning, then we'll be good. A good start, we have to play good all 4 quarters, not just 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 4, but all 4.
As I said, that CAA tournament kicks off in Washington, D.C. coming up on Friday. We're not done yet here on Palmetto Sports Daily. We've got NBA to talk about, including the most disgusting act I've ever seen on an NBA court, coming up next.
Welcome back into Palmetto Sports Daily, and we're talking about a star with a connection to South Carolina because of his significant other, Bam Adebayo, the Miami Heat star, scoring 83 points, the second most ever scored in an NBA game, only second to Wilt Chamberlain, and passing the late, great Kobe Bryant, who was previously in second place with 81 points. But Bam scoring those 83 points, going 20 for 43 from the field, 7 of 22 from three-point range, and this is not great for fans. He attempted 43 free throws, very boring and very time-consuming, but he did make 36 of them. The connection, Asia Wilson, of course, the Gamecocks legend, 2017 champ, and also holds the record, tied for the record with Liz Cambage for most points in WNBA history with 53. They both joined the podium to talk about their relationship reflection right after Bam's record-setting performance.
She was complaining about how I got my 10,000 point and how she wanted me to wait. So to have 83 The first game she's here is very special. You know, the behind the scenes and the workouts and the conversations, they're very motivating. And obviously, you see what she does, and you get inspired every day by that. So I'm thankful to have her in my life.
This has been an incredible game, obviously, but journey for Bam. Witnessing it firsthand, the highs and the lows of it, it's been so much fun. And I know he says that I'm his inspiration, but I don't think he has a clue how much he inspires me to continue to be the person that I am, but to show up for him. That's my biggest goal, is always just to be present and show up for him. And I was a little mad that you got your 10K and I wasn't here, but you made up for it.
Good thing is 83 in one game, the second most ever, is much more impressive than 10K, which dozens and dozens of NBA players have done. Julia, your thoughts, and also so great that A'ja Wilson was able to be there, celebrate that moment.
I think one of my favorite parts of going online after this happened was everyone saying, well, I pray for whoever has to go up against A'ja Wilson next year when she decides she wants to get the most points in the house back.
Yeah.
I just thought that was so funny. But Kevin, how are we feeling about last night?
This was awful. This was one of the worst things I've ever seen in an NBA game. It was disgusting. I mean, 43 free throw attempts. You know the last time the Boston Celtics as a team took 43 free throw attempts in a game? It was more than a decade ago. The fact that they were just consistently fouling the Wizards just to put them on the line so they could get the ball back and just throwing up shots. And I mean, this was awful for the game, Teagan.
Yeah,
for the game of basketball, you know, it's cool to see the record go. For the game of basketball, if I paid a ticket for that, I'd be really upset today.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that. I'd be pretty annoyed if I was sitting there in the crowd and just kept watching them walk up to the line. So yeah, I do see where you're coming from. Still a huge accomplishment, though. Great that A'ja Wilson was there. We've got to wrap it up right now. Carmine is shooting free throws from his spot in Charlotte, and we'll be back tomorrow.
Carmine, I'm going to